I think anybody who gets involved in the arts there is no one route for sure. And Patrick is definitely an example of somebody who took an original route to where he is now. And in so kind of getting our heads wrapped around you as an artist and questions that we might have, I thought we might start at, first of all, telling us what you do now and what expectations are for a soloist at the Met.
Okay. Well, I'm really glad to be talking to you guys today. Always glad to talk to Emerson, who I respect very much as a musician and as a person. So you guys are lucky to have him, and he's not paying me anything extra to say that. Right now I'm in Teaneck, New Jersey, which is about 4 miles west of Manhattan. And we're, of course, all quarantined and locked up tight. For the most part, I just went for a run with my daughter. But, there's nobody on the street. I am a full-time chorister at the Metropolitan Opera. My first job singing with them in the chorus was in 2012. While I was still a soloist, and I was kind of digging in back and forth, and I would do maybe 2-3 shows a year with them, as well as doing solo work. But 4 years ago, I became a full-time chorister, which means that's all I do. We do about 25 operas a year at the Met, and the chorus sings in probably 21 to 22 of them. And each chorister sings probably in 19 of them, because not every opera requires everybody. Some smaller operas and some that require, like Wagner operas, which require 100, 120 people. So we have a roster of extra choristers who fill in when we need more than 80. And that's what I did before I started full time. So basically right now, obviously I'm not doing anything, but up until the quarantine, I would basically work 7 days a week. I would show up at work at 10 a.m. Typical day would be work from 10 to 2 o'clock in costume on stage running through an opera. Then at about 3 o'clock, we would have maybe an hour to 2 hours of music rehearsal, where we'll just sit in a rehearsal room with our music and drill the music or work on future pieces that we're preparing. And then we have a few hours off, and then we have a show that night. So it's not unusual to show up to work at 9:30 and leave at midnight. So it's a grueling schedule, but the nice thing is we get our summers off. So unless there's a quarantine, then we get more than that.
So one of the things that's so mind-boggling about, I guess, coming in new to the chorus is you have to have this huge repertoire of war horses that the Met puts on every year, that anyone who's been in the chorus for the last 10 years knows like the back of their hand. What was it like for you just to be thrown in that first year and be like, oh my God, I've got to know Bohème, I've got to know all these things that they do every year?
Yeah, it was very intimidating. And I had some friends who were already in the chorus, and I had watched them work when I was kind of part-time. I saw how every moment they were there, the new people were working on music. And everybody comes in a different, as you said earlier, everybody musically comes to where they are from a different place. And we have guys, men and women in the chorus, who have sung Broadway. They have toured. They have been music educators. They have been church musicians before they've come to this job. So we have people who were like me, who did not get an undergrad degree in music at all. So I had some catching up to do. And so some people can pick it up right away, and it's much less trouble. We have a guy that came in last year who was a coach, a pianist. And he has less trouble because he's a fantastic musician. He gets sit down and play everything. And but you just know, they say it takes 5 years to make a chorister, because it takes 5 years for you to get to the point where you've sung most everything in the repertoire. So before I started, I had to learn Rigoletto, I had to learn Bohème, I had to learn, there were probably Traviata. There were 4 or 5 operas that I hadn't done that I had to learn on my own. But once you get there, you know, they help you learn most of the music. But these days the budgets are getting cut and there's less rehearsal time, so you do have to take it home more. But 3x5 cards, I'd sit at my desk whenever I'm not on stage or in rehearsal, sit on my desk with 3x5 cards, writing out the words, writing out the translations, so that when it comes time to stage, you flip that card over and you can write your blocking. So you have to get a system going, because you go crazy if you can't have some sort of a system to remind yourself what opera you're singing that night.
I bet. That's one of the things that astonishes me about that career path, is just the mother load of memorization. And then once you, like you said, once you're there for the 5 years, then you start making money on your salary for the time that you're not spending having to learn Bohème and try.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can, I mean, even this year a little bit, it's my 4th year. You know, I know we have more shows coming back. So when I first started, I would say I knew probably 5 of the 19 operas that I was in. And I had done 2 of them at the Met already. So I'd already done Aida, I already done Turandot, I'd already done Götterdämmerung. So I knew not only the music, but I knew the staging. Because that's a totally different thing. If you come in and you've already done Madame Butterfly, so you know the music, but then the staging is going to be completely different. So, but I'm somebody who really enjoys rehearsal. So when I was in college and I was in college choir, that was the part I loved. I loved like exploring new composers, learning about the history, like what kind of person makes this kind of music. What's inside their head that they hear this and they want to write it down and make, it's so incredible.
That's a perfect transition, because I want to follow your path from early on. You mentioned that you didn't get an undergraduate degree in music. Tell us about, hang on, tell us 2 things. Tell us how the beginning started, and as a quick aside, before you enter that, can you tell me what your favorite recent choral album is?
What do you want first?
The choral album first.
Okay. Well, because we just came off of Holy Week, I revisited one of my favorite pieces of music that I've sung. I mean, there's so many greats, but the classic, the Allegri, Miserere, is I just think is so incredible. And my experience singing it was just so fabulous. I sang after graduate school. I sang in a Renaissance group called the Waltham Abbey Singers, which was Waltham Abbey were named after Thomas Tallis's the church where he worked. And it was like a 24 voice group. The leader was a IU graduate who was countertenor, and a computer programmer was his day job. But he just loved this music. And so we did Miserere. We did a bunch of stuff from the Eton Choir book. But after knowing that you had, who you interviewed last week, I went and listened to some Tallis scholars, and I was like, oh yeah, the Miserere is so fantastic. So I would say that's on my playlist right now.
Cool. Okay, so early beginnings.
Okay, so in high school I sang in choir. I sang in like the barbershop groups and all that stuff. And we did like magical dinners and all that stuff. So I was really into it in high school. But when I got to college, I basically knew like, now I'm going to have to do like real studying for a real career. So I was pre-med for a couple of years, and then I switched over to this being a psych major. But I was always singing in choirs. I was like maxed out on every extracurricular musical thing that I could do. I was in the opera theater class. I took conducting. I ended up getting a music minor because I was just so into it. But my conducting professor, who was a student of Moses in Iowa, I forget his name, but do you know that name, Emerson?
Moses.
His name is like something Moses, Dr. Moses. He was like a big choral conducting guy. Anyway, you're like, Moses? I've heard of him, but I don't think your teacher is that old. Yeah, amazing. You didn't know it, but Moses was an amazing musician.
I was thinking Hogan, so that's the only thing.
No. Yeah, different. The last name Moses. Anyway, So she was like bragged to all her, conducting friends at other universities, like, oh, I have this guy who's like not a music major at all. He's not going to pursue music, but he's just totally into it. So I ended up getting a master's in counseling psychology and starting a PhD in counseling psych. I'd done internships, working in counseling facilities. So I never really had any inkling that was going to be something I'd do for a career, is music. I thought I'd be a college professor, teaching, doing research, and just kind of doing music on the side. Well, I finished my master's in counseling psych, and I'd been singing.
And where was this? Where was the degree?
This was in Minneapolis, University of Minnesota. I did my undergrad degree at Wheaton College in Wheaton, Illinois. And then I did my master's at the University of Minnesota. And then I'd applied for a doctoral program at University of Missouri in Columbia. And the summer before I left to go to Missouri, I auditioned for and got into the Oregon Bach Festival chorus. So because the person who was conducting, who was the assistant conductor, Kathy Romy, was also conducting the Minnesota Chorale, which is kind of a volunteer chorus that sang for the Minnesota Orchestra. And I auditioned for it, and I got in, and I went there that summer. It was like 3 weeks. And I just it was right before I was going to start my doctorate in psychology. And I just got so into it. I was singing every day. I had been working with a voice teacher for about a year. And I just recently learned to sing with vibrato. 6 months before I got into the Oregon Bach Festival chorus, my voice teacher said hey, try to sing like an opera singer. Just make fun of you're singing with Pavarotti. So I started singing with vibrato, and that was how I learned how to sing kind of legitimately in that way. And so I started working on that and playing with that for that 3 weeks when I was in Eugene, Oregon, with Helmut Rilling, who was amazing. And I just caught on fire. Everything clicked. This is what I want to do. I have a passion for it, and I keep thinking I'll get a doctorate and then I'll start teaching, and that's when I'll really start enjoying singing. And I was no, I'm going to enjoy it now, because this is what I want to do. And during that 3 weeks, not only did I really kind of come to that decision that I didn't want to be a psychologist, I wanted to be an opera singer. And I ended up sitting in the library doing a research paper on Dvorak's life, just for myself. I just had this explosion in my head of this is what I have to do. So the difficulty was that my parents are both college professors, and I had just gotten into an incredibly competitive doctoral program where they'd given me an assistantship, all this stuff, they have 800 people applying, they give 4 positions. And so they've really invested in me. So I'm just oh man. Not only that, I bought a house there.
Oh my gosh.
So I bought a house in Columbia, Missouri. Fortunately, it was very, it was small. And so I spent the year there, and I not only did I do my first year, my doctoral work in counseling psych, but I took freshman theory, sight singing, music history. I took all that stuff because I'm I'm changing, but I'm going to spend this year, on my assistantship dime to get as prepared as I can for graduate school in music.
Wow.
So I went in there, and I guess it sounds like bragging because it kind of is, but so I went to this freshman theory class with 100 kids in it. And at the end of the first semester, the professor came up to me. He's like, you're a doctoral student in psychology, and you're taking freshman theory, and you got the highest score in the class. He said, what's going on? I said, well, I've been singing for 5 years, and I've learned how important it is to understand theory and sight singing. I understand how that's just bread and butter. I need to know that. So these kids don't know that. Who, the ones that are playing in the marching band for the football games and partying, it hasn't clicked for them yet how important this subject is for them. And so that's why it's I walked in and was I know I need to know this. So I ended up applying to several schools, including Eastman and University of Colorado, and was accepted to all the places. But the tuition was so incredibly high. Manhattan School of Music as well. It was like, I don't want to go into debt, $20,000, $30,000 in debt for a career that may not make much money. So I went back to Minnesota where I could get in-state tuition, and I decided I'm going to learn to sing there. And then if I need like a resume boost and connections, then I'll get like a certificate, postgraduate certificate at a New York school. So I wanted to avoid getting really deep into debt, because I had friends that were hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt from their graduate work in music. And I want to make sure that, I wasn't stuck in an office doing temp work to pay off the loans. So that's kind of where that was sort of like the pivotal moment when I decided that's what I wanted to do.
When did you get your first professional opera role?
In your sweet state of North Dakota.
Really?
Yep. I was offered Orpheus in the Underworld with Fargo Moorhead Opera. And they canceled it a month before opening because they were having money problems. So they canceled the show. But then the next fall, they offered me, they got, the finances together, and they offered me something, and was Camille in Merry Widow. So that was my first professional gig, was singing Camille in Merry Widow with Fargo Moorhead Opera.
And how did you, I haven't talked with you about this, how did you get in touch with Cindy Oxbury?
You're referring to The Color of Gold, that lovely...
Yeah, but like Cindy was the one that put your name out there. She was like, I know this guy Patrick, and that's how we connected, I think.
I've got a little surprise for you. I'd never met her in my life. Never met her. It may have been through my agent.
Okay.
Because I think there was someone else that was possibly going to do that role, and he backed out.
Yeah.
And by the way, for all your students who are considering doing something like this as a career, there's no shame in getting seconds. I mean, there are famous movie stars as well as famous singers who got a job because someone else turned it down or couldn't do it or had a conflict or suddenly had something else come up that they wanted to do more. Because in the end, it was a fantastic experience for me, getting to work with Emerson. And working with Cindy was great too, but I did not know her. Are you getting...
Can everyone make sure that they're muted other than Patrick?
Are you hearing bells dinging?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's me because my daughter's friend is trying to FaceTime with her. There's a lot going on.
I see.
Remotely in this house right now. I told you my wife is teaching piano downstairs in our studio, and my daughter, we've worked out a system where for every 15 minutes of piano or flute practice, she gets 1 hour of FaceTime with her friends.
Fantastic.
It's bribery, but it works.
Pure bribery.
Yeah.
So in your, you bring up a good point about not being first choice. How many gigs have you gotten as a result of that in your career so far?
Well, early on, actually some of my best gigs were gotten that way. One of my first gigs so I did my master's in music at Minnesota. Then I did summer apprentice programs, which are pretty common for aspiring opera singers or classical singers, soloists, where you work in the chorus of a larger opera company, and then you understudy small roles. Sorry, I don't know how to turn that off. It's annoying. So that's kind of how you get your start, is you're learning these roles and learning these gigs that way. So then I did the Chicago lyric program. So Lyric Opera of Chicago, like a lot like Houston, San Francisco, major opera companies in the world have apprentice programs where they take usually 12 people at a time, 3 per part, and they sing small roles and eventually sing larger roles in their company, and it's a paid job. So my first gig after leaving Chicago was singing with Seattle Symphony. I did a New Year's Eve gala, which was really fantastic, but I think someone was sick and I took that and I got that job. And sometimes that's what, that gives you the door open so that those conductors hear you, work with you and like you, and then they hire you back. So, it's happened several times. Let's see, what else? Yeah, I mean, it's not unusual. And, in the end, when someone offers you a job, you don't say, I'd like to, but I'm second choice.
Right.
All you do is you say, well, I have this offer and I have this offer and I have this offer. I'm going to pick the one that best suits my voice, pays the most money, and is the best exposure, or, whatever your priorities are.
Right.
Some people, that's what's going to allow me to continue to do this other job. I have a friend who just sang at the Met. He's a lawyer, and he's able to take jobs and work remotely. So there are many ways to do it.
What do you think is the best advice for someone going into this field that's so varied? I mean, like your experience alone, musically even, just musically, runs the gamut of, Renaissance music to pop. I didn't even get a chance to ask you about doing Les Mis. But you've run the gamut in terms of styles. What do you think is your advice for students going into this business with regard to stylistic issues?
Well, I mean, you have to consider where your heart is, I think. If you love music theater, then the only advice I can give is that cheesy follow your heart. It's, in the end, if you want to perform and you want to perform opera, then follow it. If you really love folk music, if you really love Broadway, if you really love choral music, that's what you have to do, because when the times are difficult, which they will be for most people, which they were for me, in the end, you have to do what you love, what really feeds your soul. I always had a backup plan. I could go back into counseling psych, or I could teach voice. As we discussed, I was not a music ed person at all, because by the time I decided that I was going to do something with music, I knew I wanted to perform. But I think that it's important to have, as I said, the background in theory, but also conducting. I mean, all that stuff, if you're performing, all of that education is super important, because, when I was an undergrad at Wheaton, I was the section leader. I was not a music major, but I was a section leader for the tenor section. So when we'd have breakout rehearsals just for the tenor section, I would lead that. And, those experiences in a music education sort of setting, that makes you think. It helps you understand the rehearsal process, how you learn your music, and how you structure a rehearsal. I think that's very important. And also, no matter how high you reach, whatever level you reach in whatever kind of music you want to pursue, you're always going to be an educator. Because you always need to preach the gospel of what we're doing.
Right.
So
now that I have you pinned here, I want to know what your experience in Les Mis was like, because I remember it being an important time.
It was so fantastic. As you remember, I was auditioning for it actually while we were working on Color of Gold in Alaska, and actually auditioned for it while I was there.
That's right. I forgot that.
Mm-hmm. And so it was like a last minute thing. And also, by the way, that was another gig that I got sloppy seconds. The funny thing, it's a short, I'll give you the short version of the story, but the head of the company, Utah Festival Opera, had been wanting to do Les Mis his entire career. He'd sung at the Met, he was a tenor who'd sung all over the world, and then he founded this company in Logan, Utah. And for the many years, 25 years, he'd been begging the Les Mis people to let him have the rights to do it at his company. And they said, we're never going to let an opera company do Les Mis. And every year he would send them a letter. Finally, they relented. And he was probably 60 when they gave him the okay to do Les Mis. So he was so excited to sing Jean Valjean. Well, about January, he realizes he can't sing it anymore, sadly.
Oh, no.
The dream he had for so long to sing this role, he finally gets the okay, and he realizes I can't do it. So I get an email from my agent, who's a friend of his, and says, look, this is the situation. They need a recording in the next 24 hours. So I made it, I sent it, I got the role. It's a show that I don't have a lot of music theater history, although my parents are both stage directors and did a lot of music theater directing. I went to London one summer with them and saw a bunch of Broadway shows, including Les Mis, and I was just like amazed, blown away by it. I loved it. And it was something that was just like part of me that just like, when I started working on this role, I just immediately, it was like, part of my soul was in this music, more so than opera, more so than anything I ever sung. It was so special. And then, not to mention, I went to Utah to do it, and I was very nervous because I'd never done much music theater. I'd done some, but this was a big, huge role, a huge venue for that. And the conductor ended up being an opera conductor. She came up to me before the sing through and said, hey, I'm new at this, so I'm just going to follow your lead. And I was so thrilled because I had really strong opinions about what I wanted out of that role and where I saw it going. And it was such a collaboration with the stage director and the conductor and the other singers. It was a career highlight experience. Not to mention, at the end of every show, we would go out and there would be basically like a reception line after every performance of every show they do there. And so we'd stand out there under a tent with our costumes on, and audience members would just come by and shake our hands. And, Logan, Utah is like 70% Mormon. And Christians and Mormons love their messiahs, which is great because Valjean, as you know, is a messiah figure in that show. And so, I mean, the kind of compliments I got from people there, it's like, if I could go back and listen to the things that they said about how appreciative they were of what we did, it was just like, as an artist, it just fed my soul, and I'll hold on to those memories forever. It was a fantastic experience.
So, did you ever see yourself being who you are right now back when you were doing the gigs in Utah and Alaska, and what did you consider?
Yeah, before I first auditioned for the chorus job at the Met, I was like, I'm a soloist. I'm not really, I've sort of paid my dues singing in the opera chorus. I'm ready to like step out in the front, right above the orchestra pit, and just let it fly. But then I ran into, about 2011, I ran into a friend of mine who was a full-timer in the chorus. And she was like, have you ever thought about auditioning for the chorus? I was like, nah, it's not for me. She's like, they have health insurance, right? I was like, yeah. She's like, they have dental insurance, right? I said, yeah. They have pension, right? I was like, really? She's like, they make 6 figures, right? I was like, no, I didn't know that. Tell me more is what I said. The next day I sent my application, and like a month later I auditioned, and I sang in my first show with them that fall, or that spring. So, it was when you have, and also I had a 1-year-old daughter. So spending 9 months of the year on the road is really fun and exciting for a while. And then after a while, it's hard because if you've got a family, that's hard to balance. It can be done, but it's hard.
Were there times along this path that you felt like you had made maybe the wrong turn, and or did you have to reevaluate, realign? What did you?
Well, first of all, when I was doing my master's at the University of Minnesota, I have to tell you that there's a foundation in Minneapolis called the Schubert Club. Gives a lot of money to singers, and they had a master class with Håkan Hagegård, this fantastic Swedish baritone, and he had this competition basically where he had a bunch of singers from Minneapolis audition for him, and the winning singer would spend like a month at his artist's retreat somewhere in Sweden, where like jugglers and contortionists and painters and whoever would just come and like have this commune of art. Wow. So I auditioned for it. I finished singing and he said, "Patrick, do you have a day job?"
Oh no.
He essentially said, like, if you can do something else, I recommend you do it. So, it wasn't like everybody told me, you should do this. There are some people who said, you shouldn't do this. And I didn't listen to him in the end because I knew that's what I wanted to do. I forgot what your question was, but it has related somehow there, and I'll get your answer when you tell. What was the last question you asked?
It was with regard to like realigning the path once you realize.
Right. Okay. So I didn't believe that I wasn't supposed to do it at that moment. But, there were times before I got this job actually, where I was really searching. I was struggling. I was in a lot of prayer about like, what am I supposed to do? I've had a career for several years. But I don't feel like I should continue. Should I, what are the signs that tell me that I should continue, I should give up, I should do something completely different? I was not getting as many gigs as I was 10 years ago, and those gigs I was getting paid less. So I was thinking, is this a sign that I'm reaching that age now where they're hiring the next generation of singers? And it was really, starting getting this job at the Met that told me, no, this is what I should do. And in the end, it made perfect sense. Like when I got this job, it was like, yes, this is what I always wanted. I always wanted to be a professional choral singer, as strange as that sounds. It's what I always did. And I always knew. I think growing up in Minnesota, going to St. Olaf, Christmas services, going to Bethel, hearing Concordia, hearing all these choruses, like that was deep in me as part of my growing up experience. And when I went to grad school in psychology, the voice teacher that I worked with, he said, you can't do that professionally. You can't make money. You're going to have to be an opera singer. Because that's what he did. He lived in the Netherlands and he was a soloist. So I said, okay, I'm going to become an opera singer because that's how you make money. But I didn't know that eventually one day I actually would prove him wrong. You can make a good living singing as a choral singer. So, but I was struggling before I got this job because I really wasn't sure what, am I the guy who's going to just hang on and hang on and hang on until, everybody's like, why is he still doing this?
Right.
Or am I the guy that's hanging on and hanging on, then I'm going to break through and be like, wow, famous,
Right.
But in the end, it's just the path that I was supposed to be on. Just the door opened at the moment that I needed it to.
I had the luck of and right now I think everyone should be formulating a question or thinking about what you want to ask Patrick as we near the close of the interview. But just turn your video on when you want to ask a question, and then we'll try and do it that way. I was lucky enough to be there. I think the day that you got the news that you were hired, I believe I went to a Met rehearsal, a Met chorus rehearsal with Palumbo, and I was in the cafeteria or something, and I was like, Patrick, are you here with in New York or something? And you came in after just getting the news. Um, I imagine that your perspective before you got that news and the perspective after are two very different perspectives. One where you realize you made the right choices, and yeah, can you talk about that?
Yeah, well, the moment I think I just come back from Christmas break, and I had gotten the news and I saw you, but I was called and offered the job on New Year's Eve day, like the day before, like 31st of January, and it was a surreal experience. It's kind of a long story. I won't tell it to you, but there really was like I can like mark it on my calendar when I got that news, because it it just flooded me with such hope, because I had been struggling for so long, and I'd auditioned for that role, for that position a couple of times. I auditioned for it. You audition every year, you re-audition. But 3 years before, I had auditioned for a full-time position. I'd been called back as a finalist and didn't get it. And at that point, I was like, I'm not going to get this job. This was my chance, and I didn't get it. And that's when I really thought, okay, maybe I'm not going to get this job. Maybe I have to do something completely different with my life. But in the end, not getting that job and having to wait 2 or 3 years to get it was fantastic, because if I'd gotten that role, if I'd gotten that job the first time, I would not have done Les Mis. And I would not have done two jobs that really were important to me. That was that one. And then the second one was I did a concert as a soloist with the Minnesota Orchestra, with the Pops Orchestra, I think, where we did all this kind of Italian opera. And it was the first time I'd sung in Minneapolis on that kind of stage, at Orchestra Hall. All my friends, all my family came and saw it. And it was just like, it was such a fantastic experience to have everybody there and kind of celebrate. So, that's a lesson, was a lesson to me. Like, I really thought that, if I'd written my own script, I would have gotten a job the first time I auditioned, but I didn't get it. So instead of getting discouraged, I got it. I kept working, and I finally got the job. And in the meantime, I was able to have just amazing experiences that were better than if I had gotten the job 3 years ago. So, but it was a life-changing moment, because I knew where it was just like getting tenure as a faculty member. All of a sudden you don't have to worry about, like, I don't have to do another application. I don't have to go do more interviews. I don't have to do auditions. I don't have to chase the next job, which is a lot of what being a performer is about. You generally don't get a job that you're going to have for 10 years. You get a job you're going to have for a month, and then you have to find another one. So you got to be really tenacious if you're going to be a performer.
Tenacious. Are there any? Let's see, Joanna Miller, did you have a question you wanted to ask? I want to make sure we have time to ask these in-person questions.
You actually answered pretty much all of my questions in this entire interview process. But I just wanted to say that your entire story is very encouraging to me, because I, as a student, started much later than everyone that's, I'm just older. And so it's just very encouraging to know that, doors can open. So thank you.
Yeah, us Millers get a late start, I guess. Late bloomer. But are you a solo? I mean, are you a vocalist? You're looking to perform?
Well, I'm a vocalist.
Okay.
Performance is a dream, but I'm a music ed major. But God, if I could have my dream.
Well, there are plenty of music ed majors in the Met Chorus. There are plenty of music ed majors singing on the stage of the Met, I'll tell you that, as soloists and as choristers. In the end, what matters is not where you went to school or what degree you got. It's a meritocracy in the sense that ideally, although it has something to do with connections in some ways, whether you get an audition or not. But if you step into that audition room and you give them what they're looking for, then it doesn't matter where you went to school. It doesn't matter if you finished your degree, sorry, but none of that matters. In the end, what matters is, can you communicate that emotion to your audience or the people who are watching you? Do they see a spark in you? Do they, as my mom, who was a director for many years, would say, an audition, when I'm casting, I'm looking for solutions to problems. It's not like you're the best one, but you're the solution I'm looking for to the problem that I have, And that problem, when I go to an audition or you go to an audition, may not be, we want to hear the best mezzo or the best soprano or the best tenor. Like, we want to hear the best person who sings this role, who's going to communicate something unique and special. Or sometimes, crazy as it sounds, you may be the one that fits in the costume. They may have 5 people, but because they have a tenor who's 5'6", they can't hire a soprano who's 5'9". That's happened to my wife. She got a call to do Tosca in France, and because the woman that they had hired, her working visa fell through, so she couldn't travel to France. So they called my wife's agent. My wife scrambled, flew to France, did the Tosca. But the first thing that the intendant asked her was, "How tall are you?" I was sitting next to her. I could hear through the phone him asking, "How tall are you?" She's 5'7.5", and I whispered in her ear, "You're 5'5". If they're asking you how tall you are, it means they have a short tenor. She said I'm 5'5", and they were about the same height, and it worked out just fine.
Oh wow!
But you part of the tenacity when you're auditioning is you can't leave an audition kicking yourself saying I wasn't good enough, because many times you'll hear stories about people saying, "Well, that soprano was fantastic, but she totally reminds me of my ex-wife." It's like so many things you have no control over. They don't like you for some reason. All you can do is go in the practice room and work hard to do the best you can, improve your technique, improve how you perform and how you communicate. And then you go in there and you say, "This is me. This is what I do. If you don't like it, not my problem." And by the way, sometimes getting a late start is not a bad thing at all. I mean, I know a lot of tenors who started as undergrads and they weren't, their voices weren't mature, or they got a bad teacher, or, they had a lot of bad technique they had to work through. And I sidestepped some of that because I was able to stand up to teachers who I felt were not giving me what I needed. And I was strong enough to, as a 27, 28-year-old, to say, this isn't working because all you're doing is gossiping about your other students, or all you're doing is telling me to squeeze my throat. A relationship with a voice teacher, I'm getting off on a track, I'm sorry, but a relationship with a voice teacher is a two-way street. And I want to encourage any of you who are working with teachers. I don't know anything about any of you, so I'm not, this is not any way planned, but I've had a lot of voice teachers. I've had probably 18 voice teachers and probably a dozen that I've studied with for at least a year. And you have to know you're in charge of your own voice. You're in charge of your own technique, and listen to other people, listen to coaches. But in the end, you have to steer your own ship, and you have to watch out for teachers that don't have your best interests in mind.
Beautiful. I also want to, if no one else is going to continue to question, I really encourage people to, if you're going to ask a question, please turn on your video camera. We only have a few more minutes left. But I wanted to know, kind of in your choral experience, if you have had any opportunities that stand out where you were at odds with the conductor's artistic vision and had to reconcile yours as a singer, as a soloist, to reconcile that difference of artistic opinion on something that meant a great deal to you.
Yeah, when I was, between graduate school and my time in Chicago, I did a certificate program. Remember, I said I would get my master's in Minnesota, and then if I need like a big name school in my resume, I'd do that. I ended up going to Boston University and doing a postgraduate certificate, which is a 2-year certificate in opera performance. And my voice teacher was also the head of the program. And we were doing Così fan tutte by Mozart. And my parents are both stage directors. And so I have like this, I want to be involved. I want to collaborate. I want to have a say in what my character is doing. And sometimes that's a good thing and sometimes it's not. Sometimes you have directors who say it's my way or the highway, and I'm not interested in what you're doing. You're just going to do what I tell you, which I think is dumb. But so my voice teacher, who was also the head of the program and also directing the show, at one point, I was probably doing it, and it was annoying her because I was, she would say, now you're going to enter here and you're going to do this, you're going to do this. And I'll say, okay, and then what if I kind of do this and this? So I was kind of giving my own input into what I thought could be done. And she famously said, when you direct Così fan tutte, that you can do that. But I'm directing it now, so you're going to do this. And in a case like that, you have to weigh sort of politically how that's going to work out. And in that case, I kind of shut my mouth and I nodded my head. But you have to walk a line, because in the end, it's you who's up there doing it. In the end, you have to be comfortable. And if someone tells you to do something that you're not comfortable with on stage, then you have to weigh the cost benefit of stepping in and objecting, or carefully sidestepping in a way that you're going to get what you want and they think they're going to get what they want. One of my voice teachers, who sang in Europe a lot, he at one point was singing a high C. He comes out on stage and sings a high C, and the very famous conductor said, Jim, I'm going to have to ask you to scream that note. He said, so he said, what I did was, next time we did it, I sang a C sharp, and he was thrilled. So people will tell you to sing with bad technique because they're not voice teachers, they're conductors or they're stage directors, or they're going to tell you to do things on stage physically that you're uncomfortable with, whether that's nudity, whether that's doing something on stage that you just don't feel like it's going to work for you. In the end, the audience, hopefully, they're going to see if you believe what you're doing and you're comfortable with what you're doing. You have to be committed when you're on stage, and if you're not, the audience is going to sense it and they're going to smell it, and you're going to be unhappy. So, in the end, you have to be an advocate for yourself. You have to step in and say, I'm not comfortable with that. And there's sometimes you can do that and sometimes you can't. And you just have to weigh what the cost is. If that means the cost of your job, then that's a tough one.
We're winding down here. I think we're actually over time, but I wanted to quickly ask, you work in the, biggest, arguably best opera house in the world.
Who's arguing that?
And I wanted to know, how often it is that you just have to prick yourself at times just to think how lucky you are to be around such beautiful music all the time, and maybe what the last time was like, if you can recall it.
Well, let me just say there are good times and there are bad times, because the Met will hire people 5 years in advance, and sometimes that's great because they catch somebody who's at the top of their career, and sometimes they hire them when they're at the top of their career, and 5 years later, so we hear occasional bad singing on stage, for sure. Occasionally cringeworthy singing where we're all kind of like, ah! I'll just little inside baseball on that. But there's so many moments. So we had a New Year's Eve gala where Anna Netrebko sang Act 2 of Turandot. And everybody was very skeptical because she's singing everything now, stuff that she shouldn't sing, as well as stuff that she really should sing. And it's the Franco Zeffirelli production, which is this just grandiose, like the most amazing staging with incredible costumes. I mean, it's just like jaw-dropping. And she sang that thing better than I've ever heard it sung. And to be able to sit on stage, even when we're doing Turned On, it's not her. Even when it's a good singer, but it's not a great singer. I mean, to be on that stage with these sounds, I'm sitting 5 feet away from her on the floor, watching her sing this. And I just think I'm so blessed to have this job where I get to sit here and listen to the greatest singers in the world sing. And my colleagues as choristers are fantastic musicians and former soloists in their own right. The chance to sing, to do solo, because all of the choristers get to do small solos on stage too. So I've done, probably a dozen small roles on stage at the Met. And it's a blast because getting to do those small roles, I get to have that solo moment, but the show is not on my shoulders. There's not as much pressure. So it's really fun to be able to like dip my toe in the solo thing for a while and then go back to my dressing room and watch a couple episodes of Black Mirror during the intermission or whatever. It's more relaxed and fun. And then rather than traveling around and I'm sitting in a hotel room by myself in between rehearsals, I have 19 other tenors who know what my life is like. It's a great camaraderie and family, really.
Well, one last parting question. I would like to give you the opportunity to give advice or anything that you can think of off the top of your head that's been helpful to you in your career and things that you think might be helpful for these Midwestern musicians. That actually I forgot to tell you that these are all Viking fans, I believe. I don't think there is another fan here in the States. So anyway.
Well, okay. Well, that's 2 questions. One is Vikings,
sorry.
which I have to address the Vikings first. Hope I don't ruffle any feathers, but I was kind of glad to see Stefan Diggs go because, we don't need you if you don't want to play with us. And I think that Adam Thielen's going to be just fine. Maybe there's a lot of I just want to encourage all you Vikings fans. There are a lot of wide receivers in the draft. They say that there are probably 3 or 4 Pro Bowlers that are going to go mid-rounds. So don't worry about it. We're going to be just fine at wide receiver. Our quarterback doesn't throw a lot of interceptions. Hopefully he gets a little more daring and pushes the envelope. I think we're going to be okay. As far as parting words for Midwestern musicians like me, there are plenty of people who've come from North and South Dakota and Minnesota and Wisconsin and Iowa who are doing this all over the world. I'm in contact with a guy actually that I went to grad school with. His name is Corby Welch. He's from, I think, southern Minnesota. And we sang in this Renaissance choral group together. And then he did this Oregon Bach Festival. He learned German. He ended up going to Germany and working with Helmut Rilling in his chorus. Now he sings Siegfried. He's a Wagnerian singer. He's been living there for like 20 years. When I auditioned for the Met or for the Minnesota Opera, I had to sit down with the 2 guys in charge at the time, and they said to me, leave Minnesota. If you want to be an opera singer, leave Minnesota, go to New York. That was the advice I was given, and that's what I did. I think it's important to be in a smaller town, a smaller place than New York. For one thing, because when I was in Minnesota, I was able to train, I was able to get strong, was able to get roles under my belt. That's why I chose it. Because a lot of people said, you go to Juilliard, you go to Manhattan School of Music, you're going to be competing with graduate students, doctoral students who are going to get all the roles. If you go to a place like Minnesota, you're going to get a lot more stage experience. So the important thing is to learn how to sing. If you're going to do this, learn how to sing, get your technique in order, and get stage experience. Any performing experience you can get is good, because once you go to bigger ponds, you're going to feel like a smaller fish, and it's going to be hard to get those resume builders. So, if you're looking at grad schools, don't just consider the greatest schools like Juilliard. because you may end up getting lost, and you may end up becoming a pawn, political chess match between 3 different voice teachers who are all looking for the best students. So I'm not saying don't go. I'm just saying, there's certainly a lot of value going to a Midwestern school or going to a smaller school that's lesser known. If you find the teacher that you like, that you connect with, that's going to help you, and that you think you get some performing experience, that's most important. But I also say, don't, having a fallback is not a bad thing. I'll just say that. Music ed will always serve you, whether you're a performer or you've had a performance career and you're going to start teaching, which my wife is doing right now, which I'll probably be doing at some point. Because there's no better way to learn about your own singing than teaching someone else how to sing. Right, Emerson?
Yes, sir. Patrick, thank you so much for taking the time with us. We're really grateful, and please stay well and healthy. And yeah, thanks again for this. Really great.
Thanks a lot. All right. Good luck to all the rest of your semester.
All right. Take care. Thank you.
Take care. Yeah. Bye.